To our desk, where we do have an update for you. We know that a gunman wanted in a string of targeted attacks on homeless people in New York City and in Washington, D.C. has now been arrested. We do want to head out to New York City, where our Fox 5 New York team is covering this story. So again, we are going to head out there right now, where Fox 5's Robert Moses is live in New York City today. Robert, thank you so much for joining us. We know that the suspect has been arrested in Washington, D.C.
That's right, Mackenzie. We got word of the arrest earlier this morning. Authorities in the southeastern portion of the city of Washington took him into custody. He matched the description following a ton of publicity surrounding this case, and I'll show you what we mean by that. You see these wanted posters pretty much everywhere you look in this neighborhood. This is Lafayette Street in Soho in Manhattan. This was the scene of a heinous attack, one of 5 heinous attacks that took place. This one was on Saturday, and a man ended up dying here as a result of that. Word of this apprehension comes just hours after the mayors of both New York and Washington, along with top police brass from both cities, held an urgent news conference announcing a $70,000 reward for information leading to an arrest and conviction. Authorities had released some new images, some video of this suspect, who they say is responsible for shooting 3 homeless men in Washington. Those attacks started on March 3rd, and then the authorities say he is responsible for 2 shootings here in New York, so 5 in total. 1 man in each city was killed. The man who died here in New York City was shot early on Saturday morning, as I mentioned, here on Lafayette Street. It was caught on surveillance video, just a terrible video to watch, as the suspect sort of nudged the sleeping man in a sleeping bag with his foot, looked around to make sure there was no one watching, and then savagely shot him multiple times before fleeing. Well, the good news this morning is that that suspect has now been taken into custody. No word on his identification yet from police. Also, charges are still pending, but many nerves were frayed here in New York as well as in D.C. Already, homeless people struggle with so many issues. This was just another that they had to deal with. They feared for their lives. And now, at least, it appears as though police have taken that suspect off the streets this morning. Mackenzie, back to you.
And Robert, I did want to ask you 2 quick questions. The first question, any possible motive on why this man allegedly chose to target homeless people in New York City and D.C.? Any indication as to why he would kill them?
We don't know, and authorities, more to the point, didn't know either, and may still not know. They're in the process of interviewing this man at the homicide branch in Washington. But last night at that news conference that I alluded to, they called him depraved. They couldn't make sense out of why he might be targeting homeless men in particular. They also didn't have any information on his residence, whether he lives in D.C. or New York or somewhere else. They weren't sure about how he was moving between the 2 cities. He started off in Washington and then came up here. They weren't looking for any vehicle, so it's unclear how he got here after he was in Washington. So lots of unanswered questions this morning. We hope to have some of those questions answered as authorities say more later on.
And Robert, last question I have for you. We do know that police and government officials yesterday warning homeless in both New York City and D.C. to seek shelter as they worked to capture the suspect. So now that they have a suspect in custody, are they sort of letting homeless residents there know that it is safe for them, or are they still telling them to try and seek shelter?
Well, I think word is still getting out here in the city that this man has been taken off the streets. But look, even before these shootings, there was a big push in New York, in particular, to get homeless people off the subways. We've had a major issue here with people sheltering all night long in the subway system. And the new mayor here, Eric Adams, has said, look, that's not a dignified way to treat homeless people. They have a right, legal right to shelter here in New York City. So there was a big push to get the unhoused off of the subway system, off the streets, and into safe shelters. The problem is many homeless did not want to take the city up on those offers because they fear for their safety in those shelters. They say they don't feel safe in the shelter system. So it's a real bind. Where do they go? Do they sleep on the streets and perhaps risk being targeted by a crazed gunman, or do they go into the shelter system and risk their safety there? Seems that there's a bit of a sigh of relief this morning, but obviously the conversation about how to deal with the homeless and house them the best way possible, that conversation goes on this morning. Back to you.
All right, Fox 5 New York's Robert Moses. Again, thank you so much for that report, Robert. We appreciate it.